Well, welcome, friends. I'm excited to have a new friend on here, Dr. Paul Blake, and we are going to be talking about his book, The Genius Next Door. But more than that, we're going to be talking about just some financial literacy type things and how to get our families to have generational stability, generational wealth. I'm excited. As a mom of 10 kids, I need to know all the things to help our whole family. So, welcome, Dr. Paul Blake. And why don't we just start by you telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, thanks. It's good to be here. This is fun to talk about families and how do we get a decent plan in place. But how to motivate people is really the trick. Anybody can have an idea. So, yeah, my background was in finance. I went to Baylor University, big Christian university in Texas. And from there, went into the corporate world, ended up in ministry for 20 years, and now recently went back to school and studied financial parenting as a research degree. So that means you get to study whatever you want. So I focused in on not only what about personal finance, but really about the generational question of how would you motivate and inspire young kids. Because I had a great upbringing in the realm of personal finance, but then when I got to be let's say 22 or so out of college, it didn't stick. So my big curiosity was, well, then what happened? And so it led to more inspirational and psychological type of questions. And so, yeah, I really studied more of the psychology of money and how do we move forward with that. And so it's been a fun adventure. And so we can talk about that. I'm married. We have 4 kids. We're adopting 2 more this year.
Oh,
So that'll be
wow.
quite an adjustment. But yeah, their ages would be from, if you count all 6, from 27 down to 6. And several of them have started implementing a lot of these little tricks of the trade that we have. And they're several years in and have now verbalized that they love it. So that's been fun.
That's what we need. And it's so great to see that what we do can impact and help our families, right? I mean, yes, we do want to help other families out there, but hey, if it can help our own families, that is definitely where to start with and the foundation. Now, I wanted to start because this is a text conversation that I had this morning. I thought this ties in perfectly and into our subject because I have a friend. I met him at homeschool conferences. We were both speakers, and we're just checking in on each other. He always tells me books him and his wife are reading. I share books I'm reading. And he said, we're busy doing old folks stuff, estates, trusts, doctors, and funerals. I'm like, that doesn't sound fun. And he said, it's a gift of love to our children to make their lives easier someday. I'm like, well, that's awesome. Like, trust and stuff is important. And then I said, well, we're helping our parents. Like, my husband and I, like, there's not going to be any trust for them. But as I was thinking and planning for today, I'm like, but I would like my children to know how to be financially stable, to have something where they're not worried about retirement and all these things, which is exactly what you talk about. So let's talk about the Genius Next Door and just your premise about the heart of this book and why you wanted to write it.
Right. One of the premises is that we're all building on something generationally. We may have inherited a good inheritance financially as far as our habits, or it may have been one that was lacking maybe a lot of the areas that we wished for. And so, in thinking in those terms, then you start to realize, well, we may have gotten something from a grandparent and something from a parent. And as those building blocks accumulate, the question is, well, then what will we pass on?
Mhm.
And sometimes you might want it all to happen in one generation, and that might be a little unrealistic. But when we start to realize that just start somewhere, then you can actually see a lot of things happen and be quite maybe pleased with the legacy that you're leaving in that sort of sense. And so that really spiraled into moving beyond just financial literacy because since World War II, America has really emphasized financial literacy. And yet here we are 80 years later, and the financial behavior hasn't changed. It's actually gotten worse.
Mhm.
And so that's a problem the education system has not been able to solve. And that's why we're looking at this as a parenting issue. This is a family question. This is a daily habits, not an information question, but a behavior question. And the research has really shown that financial literacy and financial behavior are not linked at all. You might see someone who's in the field of finance, but if they don't have their spending habits under control, then they find themselves in debt. So Yeah, we're talking about psychology and motivation. We're talking about how to, as Christians, be less greedy or self-controlled, or looking to the future and laying down our lives for another. These sorts of concepts that we all believe in.
Yeah, it's so good, and I think what we just talked about adoption, you know, my husband said because before we said, as soon as we retire, then we will go and serve in orphanages or something, like we will serve. But God really convicted him and then me too about what are you doing with your life now? How are you spending your time? How are you spending your finances? How are you giving of yourself? And so then that brought us to adopting seven children. But everything that we have, we get to choose. We get to choose how we're going to spend all our resources. And I think sometimes we don't realize how our kids are watching us if we're just going to be pulling out our credit card every time we go to Target when we went to buy one thing and then we walk out with a cart full, which guilty. I've done that before. But when we start, like you said, just in a few hours a week, sitting down with them and talking through these things and making a plan. And that's why I was really looking forward to talking to you because I think um we help our kids a lot. We give them lectures or talks or talk through things. We help them build budgets. We've done things to help them wherever they're at. But I don't think we've ever really worked on a plan with them. And from the age of 10 kids from the ages of 36 down to 14, they're all at different stages. And I think each one of them would probably appreciate having more of a plan. So let's talk about because you start the book with a plan and why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. A lot of the classical models would say, well, you should save 50% of your money and spend this percent and give away this percent. And almost any book on financial education for parents will talk about that. So what we wanted to do was take that and say that's so dry and boring that kids aren't really motivated by that. That doesn't sound exciting to a kid. What it sounds exciting to young people, we'll say under 25, not just little kids, people under 25, something a little more motivational. And so we started off with this idea of free money. And, we've all heard that money doesn't grow on trees. And so we try to teach kids, that you have to work and everything like that. And so that's already a given, right? That's a given assumption that as a parent, you're trying to teach your kid to work. But we wanted to teach them that money does come easier than you think in the form of investment interest. But investment interest sounds like such a boring word that we just changed it to free money to try to capture, a young person's imagination, catch their interest. I'm trying to get them to listen for 3 minutes or so. And how do you do that? You've got to catch their attention. So again, a lot of it is psychological and how you're talking. And so when we started with free money, we said, look, parents don't give away free money, but businesses do. And oh well, Dad, I didn't know that. How does this work? Why do businesses give away free money? And you can slowly explain at an age appropriate level what might be helpful there. And then the incentive from there becomes, well, how do I inspire a kid not to divide up their money into saving half and giving away some and et cetera, but it's how do I inspire them to invest that? And I might incentivize that somehow. You might have a parent or a grandparent say, "Hey, we're willing to, if you're investing $10, we'll invest $5, or we'll invest some extra." Something like
Mhm.
this that might incentivize the kid. You might incentivize them saying, "Hey, if you save up $50 to invest, we'll give you $10 that you can spend right now." That's a really important motivator that a grandparent or a parent might say, "Yeah, this is definitely worth it." Because you might be able to hold on to their money and you might invest that for them to try to recoup your $10. If finances are tight for a family, then they can recoup that money by investing that somewhere. Recoup part of the money, we'll say. So there's different ways that we can start to inspire someone, because what we found was we wanted to have our kids agree to do this, and they were really hesitant. They didn't like the concepts. They didn't like the fancy language. They didn't like thinking ahead of time, just like adults don't like thinking very far into our future. And their main question was, well, how much am I going to get every single month? And that came up month after month after month, and then they finally agreed to do it. So I realized their only question was, "What's my monthly paycheck?" And I don't really
Mhm.
care about all your fancy stuff that you've read about in all your books, Dad, right? So that was a real epiphany in the sense that, well, adults really don't care much either. They're going into a job interview and they're saying, well, what's my monthly paycheck going to be? And this is a pretty big factor on whether or not I want to take this job. So we realized that was just a universal trait that people want to know a shorter term reward of roughly 30 days. And so as we incentivized the kids with rewards every 30 days, that was the big motivator that really pushed them over the edge and say, yeah, I'll invest, maybe 70, 80, 90% of my money, and I'll use that interest as my spending money, and I'm going to continue to save really, really high percent of my money.
Yeah, and I love that because they still have some money that they can spend. But if our kids, we have chores they do, or when they get older, they get part-time jobs. And we do, we talk about tithing, we talk about say we have not been good, I will just say, about helping them save. And then all of a sudden they go to the store and they come back with all the stuff that makes their room messier. It's not doing anything. But again, we just haven't sat down with a plan. So maybe okay, so for someone like our family, we currently have a 14-year-old, well, a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 17-year-old that are in the house. Like, how would we even start the conversation with them? I mean, because there's older kids too that we can, you know, again, help them with plans. But where would we start? Because I know a lot of my listeners have kids these age. Like, where would this conversation go? And what would you encourage for that?
Right. Yeah, you're looking at different developmental stages of the brain and psychological development there. In the 7 to 10 range, you can be teaching them some of the basics because they're starting to be curious about business and earning money and like you're saying, small payments for little chores and that sort of thing. When you're getting into the 10 to 14 range, they can start doing quite a bit more than you would expect as far as their work ethic. But what you're trying to focus on is, I would say, more smart shopping when you're moving into
Mhm.
that range because they're starting to have a little money. And this kicked in almost overnight for our kids. Let's say they were used to having $10 a month in spending money or something. They shifted over into this idea of living off their investment interest, and it actually went down a little. Let's say it went down to $7 or $8 or something. And to them, that was a big deal, right? They didn't like that comfort because which adult likes taking a pay decrease? Nobody likes that. Nobody
Mhm.
wants to sign up for that, but they finally agreed to it because we had this plan in place. And they wouldn't really agree to it if it went down to $5. It was just too big of a drop in their lifestyle and their comfort zone. They didn't want to do it, but they took a very small decrease. But what happened was overnight they started becoming smarter shoppers. And so that week we were at the store and one of them wanted to get something, but then they said, "Wait a minute, can you look that up on your phone to see how much it is on Amazon before I look at buying this here at the store?" So overnight they became smarter shoppers because they realized that they didn't quite have as much free spending money as they used to. So that was a real good surprise that they embraced that
Mhm.
so quickly as far as being a smarter shopper. And then from there, when they're starting to work, that's when you start to have a lot more advice that you can start to pour in there. For instance, when they're starting to work, you have more options as far as, well, where are you gonna put this money? Because you don't want to put that into your checking account that earns a 0.5% or
Mhm.
1%
Mhm.
interest or something like that. So that's where we said, "Well, why don't you invest with dad?" And dad holds on to all your money because that's one of the things that parents might really appreciate. Well, my kid has a job, but he doesn't have $3,000 in his bank account because what happens if he goes and spends that tomorrow on cigarettes or beer
Mhm.
or one of these sorts of things? What if he invests with dad? Well, great, invest it with dad, and now dad has that money and I can pay them interest on that, and I can pay a lot more than 1%. You're only gonna earn 1% at the bank, and I can pay a lot higher than that. And so they realized, "Oh, yeah, dad pays a better interest rate. I think I'm gonna invest with dad." So they got the choice, where am I gonna invest this? And then from there, it's like, "Okay, well, now I'm, handing out, let's say, $10 a month or 15, $20 a month." And if that number gets too high, well, then as a parent, you can simply say, all right, well, then why don't you help with some of your shoes that you want to buy? And why don't you help with car insurance? And so that way the parent still has some flexibility on where all this money is going to go.
Mhm. And I love that that whole investing with dad part. Because if it's in their pocket, they're gonna spend it because, they see things and their friends have things and the social everyone our girls like I'm like, "How much did you spend on eyelashes? Like, why are you buying eyelashes?" That doesn't make sense to me. But for in their little social world of other homeschool friends, they're all wearing eyelashes. But if they have less, then they are gonna be more frugal and then they're gonna start seeing that return. So let's talk about when they start seeing like, "Oh, wait, they see they are building interest, whether it's with dad or later when they go into more investing. And let's talk about that and how that can grow. Because I know one of the things you talk about is instead of just saving through your whole life to try to save up towards retirement, you talk about when they're younger, when they have more flexibility to do that. I mean, if they're still living at home and they're working a part-time job, they can put in more because they are still getting food and shelter and kind of front ending that. And have not heard that concept before, so I'd love for you to share more about that.
Right. Yeah, so the idea is that you would front load, as you were saying, all of your savings years, because it's a lot easier to save when you're at home, and it's a lot easier to save when before you're 25 because you're still in the formative years of your brain and your habit developments, etc. And if the only thing that kids know is, oh, I should invest really heavily, or in this case, save really heavily, like they don't understand investments, they don't understand
Hmm.
risk, they're not investing in the stock and bond market because they don't have that sort of expertise at their age, and you don't
Hmm.
want them doing that.
Right.
But you're wanting them to think in terms of saving. And so they're the only thing they know is to save a heavy percent. Or should I decide to save a heavy percent because this is new to me? I'm 15 years old or whatnot. But I'm realizing that if I save aggressively for the next 10 years from 15 to 25, then it's quite possible with the math that we have now and the rates that kids earn nowadays with all the wages, they could easily save up $125,000. And at first that sounded astronomically high, but then you start to do the math and you realize, oh yeah, that's super achievable. It was shocking that this was an achievable number for a young person to save that sort of money. And so you're recognizing that one, this is possible. And so how would I actually inspire them to do that? And that comes in a couple different ways. I mean, some kids are going to be motivated by, hey, I want to sign a contract with dad to know that dad's going to pay 10%. Because 10% is a number I can get my brain around, right? I can
Hmm.
understand that if I invest $100, I get $10 cash to spend tomorrow, and that's a good deal. And so they like the simplicity of that sort of math. Other kids, and psychologists have proven this, that humans in general respond well to random responses. So, like you think in terms of in the negative sense, like gambling, it's a random response of when you win, or sports competitions, it's a random response of when you score a goal or whatnot, and humans love that. And so you can use that in your favor of, hey, why don't you every month, why don't you call grandpa and you tell him, hey, this month, grandpa, I saved $10. Or, hey, grandpa, this month I saved $100. And each
Hmm.
month, grandpa says, well, hey, here's what I'm going to give you. As long as put your $10 this month into your investment account, then I'll give you $2. But if grandpa changes that number every single month, then something about our humanness, and I think it's because God created us for the unpredictable. He created us
Hmm.
to not know exactly what's going to happen next. He created because we would get bored and we would lose interest. So he creates us for the unpredictable. He puts boundaries around things, but there's an unpredictableness in how he runs that. And so we love that. And they've proven this with animals, they've proven it with humans. And so if grandpa rotates what his gift is to the young people, that's a really great way to keep their attention.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about this investment account. Are you putting it into banks or is how does that work? Because I'm gonna take notes here. Because it sounds like something I think my kids would like you said, easily wrap their minds around and motivate them. But I would love details on how that would look.
Right. So let's, for instance, say that you're going to use the 10% example. And then that way the young person is thinking, hey, I could earn 1% of the bank or 10%. That's 10 times more. This sounds like a no-brainer. I think I'm going to take up dad's offer here because it's such a great value, right? So let's say you're doing that. Well, you could put your your young person's money into, they used to call them money market funds, but most of the banks and investment firms call it a high yield savings account now. Right
Okay.
now, those are paying about 5%. And so all of a sudden, you don't have to pay out the full 10%. You can invest your kid's money and only have to fork over the other 5%. But
Mm,
the good news is that this is money that you probably would have given them anyway. This is money that most parents and grandparents probably would have given. Some people like allowance, some people like to give towards college, some people like to give towards a car or something like this. Some people like to buy their kids fancy clothes or whatever it is that we're doing. And so it's more of, hey, this is probably in your budget. And it's money that you had kind of allocated towards your kids and grandkids, but how are you going to disperse that? What is the incentive and motivation for them to actually get that? And that's where we're focusing.
yeah, it's so true. We had, we're talking about Christmas gifts. Well, our kids kind of needed new phones, so like we made it a Christmas gift because they were gonna have to buy new. We're gonna have to buy new phones for them anyway. So guess what you got for Christmas? And they were super excited. But we were
Right,
seeing that their phones were wearing out. We're having more issues, and the cost to fix them would be so. Well, it's true. You are paying money for things all the time. And this is just a different way to do it. That's so interesting. Okay, so
right.
let's talk about you talked about the psychological aspect. Now I was growing up in the 80s and there was a recession. It seemed like my dad was a police officer, my mom would work from retail, never seemed to be enough money. And now both my husband and I almost have that um we're taking care of everybody because it seems like our parents still never really got on their feet very well. My dad has passed away, but my mom, his parents, they live near us. We're trying to help them. We're helping our kids. Um, how can when whatever wherever you came from, um, psychologically concerning money, how can we change our mind to consider like, okay, let's stop, let's make a plan, let's think through these things, let's do some teaching instead of like, oh, things are really tight and all the money's just coming in and going out and we're just taking care of people all the time, which is pretty much how we've been living our whole lives. And now we have more people to take care of as we're adopting. So how do we even change kind of the psychological aspect of that when it comes to finances?
Sure. A couple of thoughts come to mind. First, even 1 to 2 generations back, it was very, very, very normal and expected actually that young people would work.
Mhm.
It's really only recently that we would have an idea that young people wouldn't work, they wouldn't have side gigs, they wouldn't be walking around the neighborhood trying to help out for odd jobs and these sorts of things. So that's a newer development that we can push back on and say, wait a minute,
Mhm.
it's good for you. You're going to go and you're going to get social experience working with trying to be interact with the neighbor. You're going to have to meet his expectations, not mom and dad's expectations when you're doing some odd jobs of picking up trash around the yard or whatever it is, and you're gonna develop socially, not just with your work ethic. So
Mhm.
one is that we can actually try to break that trend. Secondly, I would say let's take the college question for example. Should we do we save up all this money for college, or do we encourage young people to save up for college? For me, I would say that when I was young and my dad had an expectation that we would go to college, and to me, that was not motivating at all. It's like I didn't like school. Like most kids don't like being in school, and when you tell them, "Hey, why don't you save up all of your money that you could to go to school for another several years?" Doesn't that sound exciting and fun?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't sound good at all. So I am not psychologically motivated to save money for college as a young person. So that leaves us as the parent saying, well, then, okay, I'm a parent. Should I just save up all of my money for the kids' college? Well, that's kind of become a bit astronomically priced these days. And so
Mhm.
everyone's looking at alternatives. So some of the research is going to show that the kids that have a job while they're in college actually get better grades.
Mm.
Huh. Well, isn't that what we want? I want my kids to get good grades while they're in college and they're not failing out and we wasted all that money. So that seems to be a no-brainer. My kids should have a job while they're in college. Secondly, the research shows that the kids that pay for their own college get better grades when they're in college.
Mhm.
Well, now I'm motivated as a parent to say, all right, young person, You should be paying for your own college, and you should have your a job while you're in college. And so if we can start having you earn a bunch of interest right now, well, then that will help you as you're paying for college. And as you're saving all your money from 10 and 15 years on up, you might be earning three, four, five, six, seven, $800 a month. Who knows how high they get when they head off to college. And so all of a sudden it's like, all right, well, this is realistic for you. You might want to take some dual credit classes while you're in high school. You might
Mhm.
want to take some junior college classes. There's lots of ways that you can start to take an alternative path through college. It's very, very possible to pay your own way through college still if you're creative about that. But we're wanting them to not get this check from dad for 10 grand and say, oh, fantastic, I'll figure this out. It's like, no, I will put money into your investment account. That will then make your interest go up so that your monthly budget increases. And you're going to have to figure out how to do this with your monthly budget. Now, I'm increasing it for you some, but I'm not handing you a large check. I'm releasing that over time so that you're having to prove faithfulness at the monthly level.
Yeah, so good. And I think you are right that there are so many different ways to do things, high school dual credits, or even our first one did 2 years of community college before he went on. Our daughter did dual registration. Our third son started at a state college, which is a lot cheaper than a private college. Our fourth one, who's our first adopted one, she got a scholarship for a Christian college, which was way too much money. And she did horribly. Yeah. I did not, she would have done far better at a community college, still at home. We had just adopted her 4 years earlier, then moving away, going to a big college. It did not work, and we learned our lesson well, and so now we're telling all of them, you're gonna start at community college." Like, you no one needs the fancy things, the staying in the fancy dorms and all the cool things. You have to take the same classes whether you're at the junior college or whether you're at these expensive private Christian colleges. But they do know how to put on a show. When you go, it's like this is going to be the most amazing experience ever, and it was very overwhelming for her. So I think, and then there's also trade classes, and then there's so many things that people could do. I am an author. I've had over 90 books published. I've been published with big publishers. And I have my high school diploma from Weed High School in Weed, California. That is all I have. There's a lot of things that we can do that doesn't mean parents have to put big money down for college. And I do think that when they're working towards it, in which all our kids, we paid for a couple of years or helped them pay for a couple of years, and then they had to figure it out, and they did. They worked, they had part-time jobs, they did extra babysitting, they did all kinds of things. And I do think when we have the expectation that that is the expectation and that they are going to help pay the way, they do a better job. They'll be more thoughtful about taking loans if they know that they're gonna be the ones that are gonna have to be putting in towards it. It makes a big difference, and I do think that it has been just in recent years that there's these expectations there that aren't realistic, to anybody, and it's not helpful to our kids at all.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. There's so many expectations that are misguiding them. I'm even reading a book right now called Range. It's a New York Times bestseller, and it talks about how people typically don't successful people typically specialize in something when they're in their 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Hmm.
And the ones that end up really successful were the ones who had really, really diverse backgrounds. They did something for 2 years, they did something for 1 year, they tried something else for 3 years. And they're developing broad skill sets. They're learning how to think. They're learning how to be creative. They're learning how to add value to somebody else's life problem, right? And so, they're developing the different parts of their brain that really need to be firing and connected in order to do all of that sort of thing. And so the idea of trying to pick a major at age 18 is very challenging, we'll say, for any human.
Yeah.
And people are actually starting to acknowledge that. And it's like, okay, so it's no longer socially frowned upon for you to not go this traditional route. And so if alternative routes are now becoming more popular and gap years are becoming more popular, then all right, well then why don't you save $40,000 during a gap year? Your
Mhm.
gap year isn't meant to, go snow skiing the whole year or something like this. Your gap year is meant to, look, I'm going to go and develop some life skills. I'm going to put that $40,000 in the bank because that $40,000 is going to turn into a million by the time I'm 70. And that was an enormous decision that I made from age 18 to 19 to do that and take an extra year to try and figure out, well, what am I going to go study? And during that year, let's say you buy some textbooks. You buy an intro to psychology textbook that your college offers. You buy an intro to business textbook, and you skim through that. Let's say it costs you $100. Well, then go through the book, and if the book looks incredibly boring, then sell the book back and don't take that class.
Yeah.
But if it looks interesting, of like, hey, I skimmed the book, I think I'd like to read that. All right, well, then that's a class that you'd be interested in. So, there's enormous things you can do during a gap year that would actually be preparing you and expanding your skill set.
Yeah, so good. We had our ones that are 19, no, she just turned 20 and 21 now. They tried some college, didn't really do very well on the things that they thought they wanted to do. Then they got physical therapy assistant license, so they did that for a while. Then they have an opportunity to go teach preschool in Poland, and that's what they're doing now. They just are here currently getting their work visas, and they're going to be there for a year. And the experiences they have of their traveling in different countries, they're only making $650 a month. Like, it's not very much money, but, they have this experience of living overseas, living in a different culture, teaching children, English, that doesn't you know, they don't speak English as a native language. It's the experiences that they're having, the things they're learning, like, maybe I'll go teach in Italy next. Maybe I'll yes, go try all the things, go do all the things. Now I need to talk to them about saving some of that money that they're making because they can, because, their food and lodging is taken care of. But I do think once we get out of our little world and get out there and explore and try things, it really will benefit. There's so many good things. We could just keep talking all day. The book that we started out talking and went on so many tangents, which is also awesome, is The Genius Next Door. But I know that there's other things that you offer. So why don't you tell us a little bit about where listeners can connect with you and maybe some things they can look for or expect from you and what you offer.
Sure. If people want to connect, they can just go to our website, which is financialheirs.com, HEIRS, like an heir or an inheritance, financialheirs.com. And if you just create a free account there, that will really get the process started. And you'll start to get email from us, or you can set up a one-on-one meeting with us if you want to start to have a talk about your specific situation. You'll start to have access to the classes. There's a lot of free classes on there that you can listen to. If you sign up for one of our plans, then you'll have even access to even more classes. You can have access to our community. So we have a lot of families that are living this way and moving this direction already. All right, how do we keep everybody motivated? My kids might have a meltdown once or twice a year of, oh man, this is so terrible. I can't believe that, you've convinced me to save 80% of my money, and this is just such a rotten idea, and I don't ever have enough money. And then we pause and we sit down, we talk for 20 minutes, and they're like, "Oh, wait, I have way more money than my friends. You're right, Dad. This is working out way better. And I forgot about this, I forgot about that, and I totally forgot about that. You have this money over here for me now because I can't see that." And so, how do we keep the family motivated when they have their meltdowns? How do we introduce them to friends and peers that are living the same way they are? And they're on track for this $125,000. So we have that, we call it the alumni inner circle. And so people that want to be in some sort of inner circle where, hey, these are other financial genius families, let's interact with them, and they can do that. So if you just visit the website, create that free account, you can get our book online at Amazon, The Genius Next Door as well. Those are all easy on ramps for you.
Awesome. And again, the title is The Genius Next Door. The website is Financial Heirs, HEIRS.com. And then we're going to put all those in the show notes too for you to look at. But thank you again, Dr. Paul Blake. Thank you so much for being here today.